Hey Exiles, welcome to the channel, your go-to place for high-impact Path of Exile 2 builds, in-depth guides, and everything you need to dominate Rayclast. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just getting started, we are here to help you craft powerful builds that feel amazing to play. Today we're diving into an absolute firestorm of destruction, the SHOCKWAVE Totem Infernalist. This build is all about unleashing massive bursts of fire damage, melting enemies with explosive shockwaves, and relentless totem power. If you love setting the battlefield ablaze while staying safe from a distance, this build is exactly what you need. In this guide, we'll break down everything you need to know, skills, passives, gear choices, and playstyle tips, so you can start melting bosses and clearing maps like a pro. We understand a major patch is just around the corner, but we don't expect this niche setup to be affected. On the contrary, with all the new additions in patch 0.2.0, like support gems and new uniques, this build is only expected to get stronger. So if you enjoy these types of builds and want more content like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's jump right into it. SHOCKWAVE Totem, similarly to other totem skills in Path of Exile 2, has an unusual damage scaling. It uses its own weapon with a quite low base damage, and the best way to increase it is by increasing the skill gem level, which exponentially raises the mana cost of the skill at the same time, increasing the overall build's complexity. Our recommended setup offers a very easy and reliable fix for this. By using Infernalist with Pyromantic Pact, you can freely use skills regardless of their mana cost, but you will take damage whenever you fill your Infernal Flame. By increasing your maximum fire resistance, not only does the damage become insignificant, but you also become very tanky. In this setup, we have decided to convert most of your damage to fire, as there is an abundance of fire DPS nodes near the witch's starting location. You can also easily get two-handed maces with over 150% increased elemental damage with attacks, which, unlike generic increased physical attack damage, will apply to your Shockwave totems. This build is generally much simpler than most totem builds out there. You don't need any complex passives or uniques to begin with, and the damage is very high, allowing you to farm all the bosses in the game. Additionally, you are quite tanky with over 4,000 life and high damage mitigation from your Ascendancy. Shockwave Totem is your primary source of damage, and you should have 3 summoned at all times. Additionally, you can summon a 4th Ancestral Warrior Totem with Earthquake thanks to the Overabundance gem. It deals some extra damage while creating jagged ground that slows enemies and can be detonated by Shockwave totems. This build relies on a very high life pool with moderate armor rating and 90% maximum fire resistance. With Altered Flesh and a summoned Hellhound, a lot of incoming damage will be mitigated, making it a very tanky character. This build offers a decent clear speed, with most enemies getting one-shotted while being targeted automatically, even off-screen. Still, the attack speed on your totems is very low. Boss damage is very high, and you can efficiently farm all the bosses in the game currently available. This build doesn't require any specific unique items, and can generally be assembled on a budget. Only the jewels with maximum fire resistance can be harder to acquire early in a league. This build doesn't really require any unique items, but some of them will make the gearing up process much easier and flexible. Against the Darkness with maximum fire resistance, and Megalomaniac with Watchtowers or Ancestral Artifice are highly recommended. Against the Darkness, Jewel can cover a big part of your needs for maximum fire resistances. Even with bonus strength, it can be quite cheap, and if you socket it right next to Blood Magic, you can get the extra effects on 5 or even 6 nodes. Megalomaniac can save you a bunch of passive points on your tree that you would normally need to get the Ancestral Artifice passive. You should get it with either that or Watchtowers while anointing the other. The other potential passives are the ones you would normally take around Blood Magic, making it particularly valuable if you have the Against the Darkness socketed there. Vengeful Fury, Revenge, and Bestial Rage are most recommended. Ingenuity is the best belt in the game, which can massively boost the stats on your rings that have much more valuable mod pool than your regular rare belts. You should primarily focus on getting two-handed maces with +7 to level of all melee skill gems and elemental damage with attacks. Nearly all other bonuses on the weapons are irrelevant, so they shouldn't be that expensive. Other than that, you need to reach 90% maximum fire resistance, which is necessary to mitigate the damage you take when using skills. Then, you just stack as many generic defensive stats like life, resistances, and armor rating as possible, and obviously strength to provide the requirement attributes to wield your weapons. You need two-handed maces with +7 to level of all melee skill gems, and preferably 80% plus elemental damage with attacks. Unlike other bonuses, elemental damage applies to your totems, greatly boosting your damage. It's best to look for bases with lower strength requirement, or get this extra strength here. On your rare helmet, look for highest defensive stats possible, including life, resistances, and high base armor rating. You should get rare gloves, and again, look for high defensive stats. If you can also afford those, you can try getting added physical and fire damage to attack modes here. You should get rare boots where we aim for high defensive stats and at least 25% increased movement speed. You can also try getting some extra strength here. On the amulet, you're looking to get all the missing attributes and resistances. It's also one of the few items that can give you extra levels to melee gems, and it's highly recommended to get. Getting Watchtowers or Ancestral Artifice anointment here is a must, and it depends on whether you are using Megalomaniac or Tree for the second of the passives. Rings are an extremely important part of all builds in POE2, even more so if you are using the Ingenuity belt. You should aim at getting 100 maximum life here and all the missing attributes and resistances. You can also get added damage to attacks or an increased fire damage mod. If you are still leveling up or progressing through lower tier content, just get a belt with high attributes, life and resistances. Stats you will want to get later on the rings in larger quantity to be further boosted by Ingenuity belt. On the rare body armor, look for the highest combination of defensive stats you can afford. Prioritize life and armor rating as they can be found here in bigger quantity. You need to get 90% maximum fire resistance when playing this build, and this can only be found on rubies. It also has other valuable melee DPS mods. Shockwave Totem is your primary source of damage. You should have 3 of those totems up at all times. The following setup offers the best compromise between single target DPS and clear speed. Use Astral Projection, Magnified Effect, Fire Infusion, Immolate, and Martial Tempo. You can swap Astral Projection and Magnified Effect for more DPS oriented gems against stationary bosses, but for the most part it won't be necessary. Ancestral Warrior Totem is a skill that summons a totem that can use a Link Slam attack. In our case, it's Earthquake. Earthquake creates jagged grounds that slow down enemies and can be detonated for extra damage. You should be able to use 1 additional totem thanks to Overabundance gem, so it's a must-have here. Support it also with Elemental Focus, Fire Penetration, and Primal Armament for the best DPS. Stampede is a travel attack that is used for extra mobility and to deal extra damage with aftershocks. Since your weapons don't have any actual base DPS, the only way is to scale it via the strength and support gems. Use Stomping Ground, Aftershock, Rage, Momentum, and optionally Inspiration. Summon Infernal Hound as Infernalist's exclusive minion, which is used to ignite enemies, apply powerful fire exposure, and reduce some of the damage taken by your character. It's best to support it with gems like Meat Shield, Minion Mastery, Fire Exposure, Strip Away, and Elemental Army. Orb of Storms is an area spell which is used solely for the font effects that can be applied to it via support gems. It should be used against bosses, creating Font of Rage that generates rage, and Font of Blood, which increases your life regeneration. Flammability is the best curse spell for this build, which reduces the fire resistance of affected enemies. Just like Orb of Storms, use it against bosses mainly. For supports, use Heightened Curse for better effect, and Cursed Ground to have the curse applied to all enemies in the targeted area. Time of Need is the only persistent aura buff that we recommend using. It will recover a portion of your life periodically, while also removing ailments from your character. Support it with Fast Forward, so that it triggers more frequently, and Cannibalism, Precision, and Vitality, for various persistent buffs. When it comes to the passive bonuses you can collect during the campaign, you can just pick whatever you find most useful at the time. Most likely Flask and Mana Life Recovery Rate will be more impactful early on, but as you switch to the final version of the build, the recovery from those sources will be completely redundant, and you should take Charm Charges instead. From the Venom Crypts, take anything except for Mana Recovery from Flasks. Chaos Resistances and Stun Threshold will be preferred in most cases though. Now let's proceed to one of the most important parts of this build, the passive tree. Please keep in mind that following it directly during the campaign is not an option, and if you are looking on tips on how to level up an Infernalist, you should check the text version on our website. It is nearly impossible to level up with Shockwave totems, so you will have to stick to the more popular minion version to get through the campaign and early mapping. On the other hand, the final tree is quite simple. You need to allocate Avatar of Fire and Giant's Blood, two notables that basically define this entire build. You should also allocate all the fire, attack, and totem damage nodes along the way. The nodes we mention are quite spread out, so you will be able to get a lot of strength attribute from your passive tree, which is necessary to wield your weapons. Whether you are using the recommended unique jewels or not, you may need to allocate Ancestral Artifice passive to be able to summon 3 attack totems. It is also worth noting that we allocate that many passives right next to Blood Magic, since we have used against the Darkness Jewel there. As for the Ascendancy, you need the Pyromantic Pact. Infernal Hound and Altered Flesh boost your defenses, and since there is currently no usable 4th passive, just pick the small life nodes. That will be all for this guide. We hope you have found it informative and will be able to enjoy this build as much as we did. See you in the next video.